Hey, I'm on my phone right now, so please try to ignore any typos. So I, 16F, had been living with my mother, 42F, and my supposed father, 39M, for the past 16 years of my life, but I recently learned that it had all just been a lie that my parents had been covering up for ages. My whole life, I haven't ever had any photos of my family or any childhood photos. Unlike other children, all my existing pictures are ones that were clicked after the age of 5 or 6. I was told that we lost those albums of my childhood in a house fire, which I don't remember because it happened when I was very little. Of course, it's all a big fat lie, and I know that now. I uncovered this on my visit to my uncle's, my mom's youngest brother, house last week. My parents didn't like my uncle, 33M, for some reason and used to forbid me from meeting him unless they were with me. But my uncle is really cool, and he recently bought the newest book in a series that I enjoy reading, so I went over to his house last week without telling my parents. My uncle and I have always been close compared to my parents, who have always been a little emotionally distant from me. I couldn't figure out why earlier because they seemed to be close to my sister. I didn't think much of it because it wasn't like they didn't care for me or didn't show affection towards me, they just babied my sister more. My sister Riley is just 2 years younger than me, so earlier I used to find it unfair, but then I got used to it. I love Riley, so I didn't think I needed to talk about it either, as long as all our needs were fulfilled. My uncle agreed to keep my visit a secret because he knew how much of a bookworm I am. While I was going through his extensive library, I found what was unmistakably a photo album on the bottom shelf, and it was very obvious that he had tried to hide it behind another book. I grabbed it and started looking through the pages while he made me lemonade, so he wasn't there to stop me, and eventually, I came to a bunch of photos that looked like they were clicked at my mom's wedding. I could recognize my mother because she hadn't changed much, but I couldn't recognize the groom at all. It was insane to me at that moment because I knew for a fact that these were my mother's wedding photos, since I could place a lot of people from her family, but the groom, who was supposed to look like my dad, didn't look like him in the slightest. When my uncle came back to the room, his face fell when he saw me holding the album and tried to distract me by talking about the new book, but that strategy wasn't going to work now that I had something much more interesting to talk about. I confronted him and demanded an explanation as to why he had a photo album that contained so many photos of my childhood and past, even my mom's wedding. I've been told my entire life that we didn't have any pictures from the past, so this seems suspicious in itself, and then add to that the distinct difference in looks between the groom standing beside my mom and my dad. After a lot of pushing and arguing, my uncle finally told me the truth. He warned me that this wasn't his place to share, but now that I was older, even he felt that I deserved to know. I was intrigued and didn't know what to expect, but whatever it was, I wasn't expecting this. So I've only ever known my mom's side of the family, but never my dad's side, because according to my mother, my dad had been orphaned at a young age. The relatives that he did know had not expressed any interest in adopting him or helping him, so he was no longer in touch with them. I accepted that as the truth, but after my conversation with my uncle, I learned that my paternal grandparents were still very much alive and that the whole story was something my parents had made up to keep me from finding out their ugly truth. Apparently, my dad isn't really my dad. He's technically my uncle because my real dad was actually his brother. I never got to meet my biological dad because by the time my mom had the affair and the divorce was finalized, my dad had already been diagnosed with motor neuron disease, and the court hence ruled in my mother's favor and she got full custody of me. My dad's family wasn't willing to look after me, and my father wouldn't be able to no matter how much he wanted to, so joint custody was out of the question. He did get visitation rights, but my mother didn't allow him to see me very often, and by the time I was 5 or maybe 6 old, he had passed away already. I do have some vague memories of him, but I never really processed or acknowledged him as my father because nobody ever told me. The only father figure I'd known was my supposed dad, who's actually my uncle. My mother got married to my dad about 20 years ago, after dating throughout high school and college. Since they'd been together for so long, it was a given that they'd eventually get married and start a family, but apparently, my mother wasn't ready for that and resisted the idea of it for ages. It wasn't my dad who ever pressured her, but his family. He'd ask her to turn a deaf ear to it, but she'd get way too worked up, and eventually, she couldn't handle his nonchalance anymore, which led to a lot of fights between them. My mom said that she went to his brother so he could help sort things out between them, but ended up relying on him for more than just emotional support. 4 years into their marriage, my mother started an affair with her brother-in-law, and she was about to confess to my dad, but then she realized that she was pregnant, and within a few months of that, my dad was diagnosed. She finally came clean to him after my birth, and then, he filed for divorce and joint custody but failed. He tried several times afterward, but his appeal was rejected on account of his illness, and so I never really got to spend any time with him, and he never got to be a real dad to me. I barely even remember him, if I'm being honest. I was his daughter for sure though. That had been proven by a DNA test, which was probably why my parents never felt very emotionally connected to me, because I only reminded them of my dad, whom they'd cheated and screwed over. Then Riley was born 2 years later, and by the time I turned 6, my biological dad was gone forever. So that's my wonderful family for you. They went to insane lengths to cover up the truth and make sure I never found out about what they'd done in the past, but now that I knew, I couldn't just look at them in the same way ever again. All the respect I had for them was just gone, along with all the love. They'd always kept their distance from me emotionally, and I'd thought that it was because they adored Riley more since she was younger, but no, it had less to do with her and everything to do with me and my heredity. After my uncle was done telling me the truth, I broke down into tears because it felt like the world had come crashing down around me. I'm not even kidding, it literally felt like the worst thing I could ever think of had suddenly materialized. I'd always made excuses for my parents' lack of emotional connection with me and had refused to entertain any thoughts of them loving me any less, but as it turns out, it was all true, and the one shot I had at having a real dad had been gone for a really long time. It sucked, but there was nothing I could do to change the truth, so I decided that I was going to move out of my parents' house and stay with my uncle for a while. I couldn't just look at my parents the same way ever again, and I don't think they would have ever told me the truth themselves either. It was purely by luck that I'd found out, and now I wish I hadn't found out at all, really. I made my decision the second I heard the full story from my uncle and requested him to get me my clothes and other belongings from home because I just couldn't bear to see my parents at the time. He agreed and I didn't have to go back, but my parents did call me as soon as they learned what I was planning to do. They told me that I couldn't live with my uncle because despite everything, they're still my parents and they still love me, so instead of throwing a fit over something that happened years and years ago, I should try to be a grown-up about it and be more considerate of their feelings. I couldn't believe that they were telling me to be considerate when they were the ones who'd been lying to me for as long as I was alive. I could have forgiven the lying if they'd done their best as parents, but they didn't even do that and always made me feel inadequate and like I was never gonna be enough no matter what I did. So I lashed out at them over the phone and told them that they were liars and awful parents and I did not want to see them. Then I hung up and waited for my uncle to come back home while sobbing my feelings away. My uncle returned about an hour later while looking guilty about everything. He apologized to me as soon as he came back home with my clothes, laptop, and other belongings that I'd told him. We're in the middle of our winter break right now, so I don't need my school stuff for a while, and the ones that are absolutely necessary are already in my locker. My uncle said that he was sorry that he told me everything so suddenly without preparing me for any of it, especially when it wasn't even his place to say anything and it was clear that my parents had torn into him for telling me the truth. He said that I could live with him for a while and think about what I wanted to do next, but I could feel that until you decide to go back to your parents was implied. I didn't say anything to him at the time, but I'm sure he won't be too excited about sharing his house and supporting a 16-year-old until I go to college. I don't like the idea of living with him until college because it's very obvious that he doesn't actually want me around permanently. He's only doing this for me out of temporary kindness. He loves me and I love my uncle too, but this situation isn't ideal for either of us. There's a lot to think about regarding the future that I didn't take into account when I made my decision. On the other hand, I also do not want to go back to my parents. It's not like they haven't been trying to remedy the situation, but I can tell their attempts are really half-hearted, and it's mostly out of a sense of obligation and moral duty, not because they really miss me and want me back. All their texts and calls are just all about how it's impractical for me to run away instead of being a grown-up and confronting the situation so I can just deal with it. They keep coming up with practical reasons that I can't continue to live with my uncle, as if I'm not already aware of those reasons. Not once have they said that they miss me or they actually want me back and that they love me. They keep saying I need to be a little more grown up about this, but hello? I'm not a grown up at all, so how exactly am I supposed to act grown up about this? It doesn't even make sense, and honestly, the more they call, the less inclined I feel to go back to them. On their last call, they said that I should come back because it reflects poorly on the family if a teen girl chooses to live with her uncle instead of her parents, and just makes it sound disgusting and perverted. I don't know what to do at this point, and I feel like I might be overreacting here, but again, I don't know. Ida for refusing to go back to my parents once I learned that my dad isn't actually my biological dad and he's technically my uncle because mom cheated? Update 1. So it's been a couple of days since I posted here, and yesterday, out of frustration, I told my uncle to try and put me in touch with a lawyer so I could at least try to make sense of this mess that I was in. I don't think he'd been expecting that and looked pretty surprised when I brought it up. I couldn't keep it in anymore and ended up crying while telling him how lost I felt. I didn't even intend to cry, but I just couldn't hold the tears back anymore, and they just kept coming as I wiped them away and tried to explain how I was feeling. It had been almost 10 days since I moved in with him, but despite having him around and also having the constant attention of my parents, which I'd always wanted, I'd never felt more alone in my entire life. Yesterday it just got too much to bear and I broke down in front of him. Thankfully my uncle was a lot more understanding than my parents, and he hugged me and consoled me while I was crying, and after a while, he was crying too. He told me that he'd tried his best not to let me in on this nasty secret, but he just couldn't do this anymore, and when my parents had found out, they'd been vicious and had attacked him on every possible level. My mother especially had been the worst and had called him a weird pervert who wanted to hog my attention. I think that's pretty much the cruelest thing I've ever heard, because so far, nobody in this family has tried to help me at all. Least of all my parents, so for them to say something so disgusting showed me what kind of people they were and how they didn't care about anyone apart from themselves. I don't even know what kind of person says crap like that about their own daughter and brother. I'm sure they wouldn't even care for me if it wasn't for the fact that they'd actually have to explain my absence to their guests and couldn't just play happy family without me. They're just so incredibly selfish that it's literally infuriating. My poor uncle also had to face the consequences of telling me the truth and of finding out. We truly were the black sheep of our family, and I'm glad we were, because I don't think I'd be content with myself knowing that I fit in with these people. At least Riley's been great to talk to because she doesn't bring up my parents at all. The only thing she said is that she misses having me around, but I can take as much time as I need to come back to her. She specifically said her and not us because she knew I didn't want to come back to our parents. They'd never made me feel loved or anything close to it even, and I could see that very clearly now. My uncle told me I could live with him for as long as I wanted to, and has even apologized for making me feel like I wasn't welcome here initially. He got too caught up with his own feelings but totally forgot that what I was going through in my teens was a lot harder, and if he was a good human being then he'd put my struggle above mine, which is what he planned on doing now. He's told me that he's going to start talking to lawyers because he wouldn't put it past my mom to try something funny even if it's at the expense of her own brother's reputation. That's how low people's opinions of my parents are, and also there have been loads of people in the comments who have told me that I'm overreacting, but I'd just like to tell them that if they can put themselves in my shoes even for a second and tell me honestly that they'd still be okay with their parents after finding out the truth, then I'd believe that I might be overreacting. Unfortunately, they can't do that, so I don't think I'm out of line for reacting the way I'm right now. I've been lied to my entire life and cast aside for no fault of mine, so when I find out about the truth, I have every right to be pissed about it. Update 2. My uncle has spoken to a lawyer and has prepared the documents for him to legally adopt me after my parents sign away their rights over me. I told my parents about it last night and it didn't go well. I'd called them to inform them that this is what I wanted, but they had an outburst at the very suggestion and called me ungrateful for being so dramatic despite their best efforts. Best efforts? They hadn't even visited me after I'd moved out so they could give it a rest. I brought that up with them and of course, the excuses began pouring in. They wanted me to have my space so they hadn't visited, but now that I was demanding space on a more permanent basis, they were afraid of what other people would say and that they'd find out about how my mother and father were both distinguished cheaters in their prime. It's probably also their biggest and only achievement, I think, as long as you don't count gaslighting your daughter to the point of doubting if her anger towards years of deception is even valid or not. Then that would be another contest for them to win. I don't care if I'm being harsh on them right now. After the things they've said, they totally deserve this and much worse. They're lucky I'm doing it on a platform and venting it all out in a way that still protects their privacy instead of airing their dirty linen in public. I could choose to name and shame them if I wanted to, but that would be too low for me, which is why I'm not doing it. I won't be afraid to do that if they try anything funny though, so I've steeled myself for that as well. Riley is not exactly happy about my decision, but she respects it and she understands it, which is the most I can expect because she's even younger than me, and if I haven't been fully able to bring myself to cope with the situation, then it'll be really unfair for me to expect her to do any better. I don't hold it against her that she's choosing to live with my parents because it's not much of a choice if that's your only option. She's told me that she can never see them in the same light again, but she knows she has to make the best of her circumstances and can't just walk out like I had, because my uncle most certainly cannot take up the responsibility of 2 teenage girls. And I'm not sure if that'll be possible legally either, since my parents have been decent to her, not so much to me. My uncle and I have given my parents about a week to think about whether they want to give up their parental rights amicably or if they want to take this to court. Letting me stay with my uncle voluntarily is a lot better for them, because that way they don't have to waste a bunch of money on a lawyer to fight a custody case they're destined to lose, because I don't want to stay with them now anyway. Update 3. Hey, folks. Been a week since the last update and I'm happy to inform you guys that 2 days ago, my parents finally terminated their rights over me. I'll only be a minor for 2 more years, but I'm glad this happened because I absolutely do not want them to have any control over my life at all. This happened thanks to my grandparents, but unfortunately not in the way that you would expect. They didn't suddenly stand up for me, but instead came over a couple of days back to try and drill it into my head that I had to be grateful to my parents that they'd even taken care of me for so long after my dad's family refused to take me in. They didn't speak to my uncle because apparently they'd cut him off, but focused on schooling me only. According to them, I should be thankful that my mom adopted me and my dad raised me despite my biological father being someone else. They thought my parents had done it out of kindness, but I knew that it was all rubbish. The only reason they'd done so was because they needed to save face, and they knew that if they hadn't taken me in, my father would have made sure everyone knew about their affair while he was alive, which he didn't do. I know all this because my uncle told me all about it, since now there was no point in keeping secrets anyway. I told my grandparents the same, and that led to a huge fight between us, after which they left and swore that they'd make sure my mother threw me out as if I hadn't already left on my own. Their threats didn't scare me, and I made sure to slam the door right in their face once they left the house. My uncle and I were both pretty heated after that argument because there'd been a considerable amount of mudslinging and name-calling, but at least the one good thing that came out of it was my grandparents forced my parents to give up their parental rights. So as of now, I'm in the process of getting legally adopted by my uncle and I'm fine with it. The only thing that I'll maybe miss is living with Riley, because she texted me and told me that she'd been forbidden from speaking to me or seeing me after this, but we know we're still gonna keep it up. We're certainly going to see each other at school, and maybe we won't be able to spend as much time together, but we'll have to make it work somehow. Things are gonna be different from now, but I'm prepared for it all now. At least I won't have parents who don't even love me bringing me down anymore, and can finally be myself without constantly feeling the need to seek validation from them. I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off of my shoulders and can breathe now after a long time, and I swear this feeling is worth every single tear I've shed over my horrible parents.